welcome to Inspiring Women with ADHD. I'm Renee Allen, your host of this podcast, and I'm so excited that you're here. And I want to make sure you know that inspiring women with ADHD includes you, meaning you inspire me. Anyone that I meet that I find out has ADHD, I'm able to learn from, whether it's in person or online. You inspire me. So thank you for being here. Thank you for joining this community, even though you may not feel like we're all in a room together, but I feel like we are. When I'm talking, I feel like you're on that couch just to my right. So thanks so much for being here. Today, I want to talk about working memory. Working memory. Have you ever heard that term? If you have ADHD, one of the challenges that we have in executive dysfunction is with memory. And we may not think of it as working memory, but we forget things. We forget things. We forget all kinds of things. But working memory actually involves more than forgetting things, but it leads to forgetting things or losing things or not being able to keep track of what you said you'd do or somebody asked you to do or any of those things. So it's kind of confusing because if you read about, s- you know, the symptoms or the areas of your brain that don't function as well or well, dysfunction, one of them is working memory. And it's like, well, what's working memory? Because most of the time, at least in my life, people talk about short term memory and long term memory. They don't talk about working memory. So it's just about like something that you need to remember for a little bit of time. Oh, yeah, my short term memory is horrible. Or I can't remember things from that long ago. You have an amazing memory, a long term memory. Maybe they don't say you have an amazing long term memory. They usually just say you have an amazing memory because that's what we usually think of with a long term memory. Working memory is related to short term memory, but it has a component of processing information, storing and processing information temporarily. Have I already lost you? If I was listening, I'd already be lost because I had to read this multiple times to make sense of it. And then I had to compare and contrast. That's how my brain can remember something is to see, well, what's an example of this? Or what's the difference? Or how does this play out in my life? I guess that's an example, but that's more making it visual, right? You can kind of see that. Oh, yeah, I can see how, I relate to that, or I've experienced that, or however. So, working memory comes into play when we need to solve a problem, when we need to make a decision, or when we need to multitask. And solving a problem or just decision making, making a decision, I would say it also, I mean, they don't have it written there on their psychology website, but it also, you have to be able to store that information. You also have to remember a commitment, a date, or you don't even have to remember. I mean, sometimes, okay, let me back up a little bit here. So sometimes we might have a doctor's appointment, they give you a little card, or thankfully now they send emails or texts. Sometimes they're good with that, sometimes not. It depends on the system. But those are the kinds of things that will help us not forget because you might be at the doctor's office and they say, "Well, Thursday, August 20th work," whatever, and you think through, yeah, on Thursdays and I won't be out of town. Yeah, that should work, but you don't have a calendar with you. Although maybe you have your phone with you, but if you're like me, I don't like putting things on my phone calendar. I do if something invites me to do it in an email, I'll go, sure, but I don't like to just write it in there. And honestly, I haven't figured out quite yet how to make it send me an alarm in a way that would help me during the day. Usually, usually I just see it some random time, like early that morning or later that night, and it doesn't always help. That may be something that becomes one of my tools someday. Right now, it doesn't work for me. And it's important to recognize that because there meaning for you, not about me. You don't need to know what works for me, but it's important for you to recognize what works for you and that not everything will work for you, even though it might be somebody else's like best ever tip or tool. I find that when I read those best ever tips and tools, some of them are fantastic, life changing. Others are like, wow, that just didn't work for me. But it might in 10 years, I could try it again or in another way. So be willing to try different things and don't feel bad if it doesn't work for you. Just try another tip. But back to decision making, multitasking, blah, 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 blah. But for me, really, for getting a doctor's appointment, you might just get the wrong day or you might just get the wrong time. I do that where I'll have the day on my calendar. I'll even have the time in my calendar. But for some reason in my mind, which is the imperfect part, right? It's not the fact, it's not the written down part. My mind thinks it was at 1:15 when it was really at 12:15 or something like that. I don't know. Sometimes, or you know how sometimes they tell you, Arrive 20 minutes early," and then you think that's, I don't know, I don't know. There are just ways that it can get messed up in your brain, and that's because that information is not getting processed correctly. And so even though you're not solving a problem, you're not making a decision, it's not processing for you like it might for somebody else. And other people think, well, yeah, I knew that. And you think, I didn't. I don't know why my brain, glitched. That's kind of what I say. Or you've always gone, I did this once in college. I always went to this class at a certain time once a week. I showed up there one day a half hour early and maybe even like 35 minutes early. I probably was just a little bit more than a half hour early. I showed up early and I sat out there and I thought, wow, I'm so early. I can do homework outside the door. And it was a piano class. It was a private one-on-one piano class that I had to pay extra for on top of tuition. I really enjoyed it. I went once a week. I sat out there and for that 35 minutes, I listened to someone play the piano. And at the end of that time, I walked in and the teacher said, "You missed your lesson." The person playing got to have a double lesson because I never showed up because I thought the time was a different time than it actually was. And I thought, I always knew it was that time. Why did my brain glitch? And working memory has to help us process information to interact with the rest of the world, to be responsible or to find something that you put somewhere. So even though they say problem solving, decision making, multitasking, anything that takes information and requires you to do something as a result of that, that is your working memory. I guess if you think of memory that causes you to do something. It's working towards something else. Short term memory is part of or is related to working memory, but it is just for information only. It doesn't require you to take an action because of that. So it could be memorizing a phone number, memorizing, my mouth goes out sometimes, memorizing a phone number, memorizing your social security number. I learned that once, always remembered it. Glad I did, because I don't know that everyone knows theirs, and it's nice to have it handy. But even memorizing a face, that's something that you might meet somebody and then, think, I don't remember them, but they remember me. And definitely remembering names, because names are something that if they don't go in there and they don't attach it to something, that short term memory is just gone. And you have to ask again, and it's kind of embarrassing. But it's better than not knowing their name for a long time and you still see them and talk to them. But a long-term memory is longer. It can even be lifelong. It's for an extended amount of time. And one of the websites I looked at, it was this psychology one, it said that short-term could be processing information that comes into your brain for like 20 or 30 seconds. And you can only hold a certain amount at a time. They said 5 to 9 chunks of information at a time. Interesting, huh? But anyway, but working memory is different, even though it overlaps with short-term memory. It's different in that you need to be able to process, you need to act on that information. And if you think about it, you could probably find all kinds of ways that you see this play out for you in a different way than for people who don't have ADHD. And one of the things that I thought about is that whenever I played games, board games, whatever games growing up, I liked to read the instructions, not just hear them. And you know, when you sit in a group, okay, this is how you play the game, especially cards, because they don't have written instructions. Okay, this is how we play Crazy Eights or something like that. Crazy Eights is pretty simple, so I like that one. Or War. Did you ever play War where you each just put down a card, and whatever's the higher one, then you get to take the other ones, and you keep seeing how many cards you can get. Or Go Fish, those are the easy ones. But there's a lot of new games that come out all the time, and people say, oh, try this game. And I feel like I'm one of the only ones that really just doesn't know what's going on. And then, it becomes my turn, and I'm thinking, okay, so what am I supposed to do with this card? Or what am I supposed to do? Hey, okay, tell me again, or whatever. And if there's written instructions, I say, can I have the box? Can I read that? Because if I see it, I can remember it better, which is another interesting thing about working memory and ADHD. One of the websites, and each one that I look up when I get this information is something really reputable. So I won't quote them all the time. But this one talked about verbal working memory. So just having words versus visual working memory and actually seeing something, remembering something you see or remembering something that is said. And this website said that for ADHD, people with ADHD usually have verbal working memory that's twice as strong as visual working memory. They'll remember words more than something they've seen. And they said it's not always true, though. It could be different for this or this or this. And I thought, I think I need the visual. I really do. But there are so many ways to process information or to retain it. And I another thing I looked back to after I found out I had ADHD and that it involved processing information that you've heard. And I guess I'm supposed to take that word and that sound, I'm guessing that's the verbal, right? And process it so I remember it. Store it somewhere or act on it somewhere or something. And I used to raise my hand in Spanish class all the time and say, how do you spell that word? How do you spell that word? Because they would say it, and I think, unless I can see the letters, I don't know what you're saying. And I've even done that with people who tell me their names. When I meet someone, one of my friends' name is Thira, Thira. And when I first met her, she said, I'm Thera. And I thought, I'm not going to remember that. Like, I'm not quite sure what she said, but if she tells me, because sometimes they tell you their name so fast and it could be like four or five things. And so, so I'll just say, how do you spell your name? And then it was funny because she said, I know it's a strange name and blah, blah, blah. I said, no, it's not a strange name. I just need to remember it. And that's how I remember it. But yeah, and then there's other ways of remembering things, like what your body experiences, or smelling, or touching. And I'm sure you could, if you dug deep enough, you'd probably think of some of those things. But teaching yoga, I have found a few things by teaching, because usually you teach something on one side, on the right side, and then you do it on the left side. And for the most part, I do the right side first, but I don't always. So if I always did that, if I was consistent, then I'd always know on the second side it was the left. But for some reason, it's not that simple. Like sometimes you're facing a certain way and they can see it this way. I don't know. Or you just did that. You need to do something different. I don't know. But so sometimes I'll do one side, especially if I'm filming from home, because, I do it all by myself. So I'll have the webcam set up as far back in the room as I can so it can get me standing up. And then partway through the class, as we move lower onto the mat for kneeling stuff or seated stuff or lying down stuff, I'll move the camera in closer because I know some people are using a laptop. They don't, might not have it hooked up to their TV, or some of them are even on their phone. So they need to be able to see me bigger to be able to tell what I'm doing sometimes. And what tends to happen is I'll set them up like, oh, let's sit cross-legged and bring your left foot in front of your right. And it gets more confusing when I'm mirroring them because depending on what recording app I'm using, sometimes what they're doing is the opposite of what I'm doing, which is the same thing in real life. Like if I'm up in front and I say, put your left foot in front, I'll put my right foot in front so that it looks like a left to them and it makes it easier for them. I'm all about making it easier for everyone if I can. But doing it online is a little less perfect because for some devices it shows up the same as what I'm doing or mirroring what I'm doing. Anyway, so I'll go back, and once they're seated, I'll go back and I'll move the webcam in a little closer and kind of situate this, and I'll even move my mat a little further away from that edge of the room so I have more room when I get down. And then just from all that distraction of doing something else, I come back and I think, like, okay, which foot was in front? And if I'm just going off of remembering the word I said, that's my least powerful way to recognize what was happening, to remember. It's like just remembering what I said is like pretty much gone from my brain. But if I cross my legs and I can feel like, no, that wasn't what you were doing. You were doing this. I'll see it on my own body from how it feels. And then also sometimes I'll have a block or something right there and I'll see that. And that is a really good cue because, oh, I had this under my knee because that was helpful on this side or whatever. But it's really interesting that sometimes I'll, go into a twist or something and I'll think, you just did this because when you twisted that way, you saw that over there or whatever. So there's so many ways that we can remember things. And I guess for me, it's more visual and more body sensory. There's different ways. There's tactile, what you touch, what you hear, what you smell. We know all those things bring back memories. But anyway, so back to forgetting, because that's where we can apply this to our lives, right? We want to be able to not lose things as often or at all. Wouldn't that be amazing? Do you think people like that exist that never lose anything? That would be so amazing. That'd be so great. Or people who buy a Christmas present early and hide it and know where it is. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great? There are tips and tricks to help with that, but then there are also just parts of our brain that function the way they do. So there's a way to make it easier for ourselves to not have that happen. And then there are always those things we lose that fall through the cracks for sure. But one thing that I learned about that can really help the working memory work better, have more room, because it's a limited storage space, a limited capacity system. Oh, really? Yeah, I think we know that. It's very limited for us. And that's one of the things that I learned is that on an overwhelmed brain, are you raising your hand? I have an overwhelmed brain. On an overwhelmed brain, it can be a lot to process when information comes in that the working memory needs to handle, needs to process. And you're supposed to store and process it temporarily. And just back to the doctor's office thing. So you get that information, it's not going to be there for very long. But if you have it written down, it can be there longer. If you can remember, if you can put it somewhere that when you get home, you'll see it, then you can get it on your calendar. Then you can put it on your phone, set an alarm, send yourself an email. I've been sending myself emails more than I use a calendar, and I know that's kind of bizarre, but I know I'll read my emails, and for some reason I haven't figured out my calendar alerts yet and how to make them work in my life. But whatever your process is, if you can just store and process it long enough, make a decision with it. Oh, I'll put it right here next to my water bottle in my bag because I know I'll take my water bottle out and then I'll see that card or whatever it is, or send yourself a text or send yourself, oh, you could write an alarm that, like, if you're going to be home in 20 minutes and label the alarm, put doctor's appointment on calendar. Yeah, I would do something like that, which I actually have talked to a few people recently that went, I tell them things like that. They're like, why would you need to do that? Like, believe me, I need to do it. I need to do it. But another thing, okay, so we don't have a lot of space. It's overwhelmed. What can we do if we have a computer that doesn't have a lot of space and you need to store files? What would you do? This is like a classroom, playing school teacher for a second. We would get a jump drive, right? Or an external hard drive, and we put it in our computer because we bought one that only had, so much storage space, and we need more storage space so that that information isn't lost, so we can save it. So that's what we do, and we probably do it without recognizing it. But if you see a need to do it more, you can see how it can be helpful. So they call it externalizing. So you take what is inside your brain and you realize there's not a lot of room here. It's not that you're not smart, it's just you just don't have a lot of room and you have an overwhelmed brain. So you got to do something with that. So you have to externalize it. So you write yourself a note. Hopefully you don't lose that note. You write yourself an email. You schedule send. Do you know how to do that? So you don't have to, like, I used to just send myself an email and try to keep it in my box without opening it. But I learned about scheduled send. Now it just shows up when I want it to. So yay for that. Thank you. Thank you, high tech people who think of that, those kind of things. But externalizing gets that information out of your brain, and it helps your brain be not as overtaxed or taxed. It helps your brain not have to work as hard. Kind of like when you're using a computer and it's going slower all of a sudden, and you're thinking, why is it going so slow? Well, because you just saved that file that was 4 gigs, which I do when I record my yoga classes. I could just have Zoom record it, but they don't do it in as high of quality. So I record it with my laptop, get that 4 gig, 5 gig file on my computer, and I get it out of there as soon as I can. I upload it to my video library, and then it's not so down my computer as much. But back to the brain. Yeah. If you just write something down, even say it out loud, sometimes that can help get you as far as you need to go. Have you ever done this? Like, this is something that's super temporary. So let's say you're in your kitchen and you think, I need to go get, I don't know what. This happens to me all the time. I need to go in the other room and grab my phone and bring it back in here so that I can finish doing what I'm doing in the kitchen. Why would I need to do that? Probably to put in earbuds and listen to a podcast or an audiobook so I could stay focused. That's probably why. But sometimes you just need a little information. You just need, oh, I need this recipe. I need to go get a phone charger, whatever it is. So you're going to go in the other room to get that thing. You have that information in your brain. I need to go in there and come back. I need to go in there and get what? I need to go in there and get my phone and come back. Chances are, if your working memory is not doing very well, doesn't have a lot of space, not functioning as well, chances are, if you walk in the other room a few seconds later, you could totally forget why you went in there and start doing something else. And maybe that's okay in your life, but a lot of times it's not, especially if you're leaving your kitchen and you're cooking or something. So you want to find a way not to forget what you're doing. And talking out loud is actually a way to externalize what's in your brain. You're just telling your mouth, your voice, I don't know how the body works. You're telling yourself, say this out loud, say this out loud, say this out loud. And when you do that, you're hearing it. You're hearing it, and it goes back in your brain. That's my little tip. Maybe you already do it, but I talk to myself a lot, not all the time. It's not like I have this kind of conversation by myself, but I do say things out loud to get myself to remember what I'm doing. I paused right there because I also do it to get myself to do something too. But that's another topic, kind of the overwhelm of, oh, and I just say, stand up, stand up, stand up, go, you know, get myself to do something that I don't feel like doing. Any way that you can get yourself to externalize information that you need to act on, it will be helpful to you. I think that's why so many of us use post-it notes. And you've probably heard me say before, post-it note needs to be with a black Sharpie or I won't even notice it. But whatever it is that gets your attention, that reminds you to do something that you need to do or just helps you remember it, then that's super helpful in your lives. And yeah, the memory's just a funny thing. And I'm sure you've known that if you have a picture in your mind, like a story to follow, that helps with remembering things, right? But I never really pondered like what helps me remember what I need to do and why is that different than a phone number or something that happened when I was in third grade. And I'm really curious because I didn't see any information on this, just that piece that said verbal working memory tends to be twice as strong with people with ADHD. And it's not true in my case. So we can always be different than the people in the studies because they didn't study us, right? But I wonder if people with ADHD who struggle with the working memory have better long-term memory. Maybe I'll look into that because I have really good long-term memory. And I mean, I've known that I remember lots and lots of details, lots and lots of stories, but I didn't know it was unusual until recently. People have been saying most people don't remember all the things that you remember. But maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just me. If your long-term memory is pretty amazing too, I'd love to hear that. I'd love to hear about that. I don't know. Maybe it's hereditary too, because my dad is 86 and he remembers every detail of every story of his life. He really does. He really does. So who knows? But I think he has, I don't know, I think he has some ADHD traits too. So maybe that came hand in hand. Maybe got both of those from him. I think that's going to be it for today. I don't want to overtax our brains because these are, I don't know, they're just harder topics, especially for me. Like I said, I have a harder time listening and remembering things than seeing and remembering things. And you're just listening. You're just listening. But hopefully you know, was able to make it simple enough to make sense because it wasn't making sense for me when I kept reading about it. Yeah, because working memory capacity, storing, processing is really just about doing something with information that we hear or see or touch or smell or what were the other ones? I guess it's mostly hear or see. And hopefully making sense of it helps you just to see where that might play out in your life, not feel bad about it. I hope you don't feel bad about it. I I felt bad about it for a long time. I have 6 kids and there were a lot of years that a teacher would say, "Oh, didn't you know we were doing this today?" And I'd think, "No, no." And then I'd find the papers that came home like 3 months later or something. You know, if you haven't watched The Middle, that sitcom, I don't know when it ever actually came out, but you can watch it on maybe Peacock or something. The mom in that show is such a mom like I was of like not remembering all the things she's supposed to do for her kids to for school or whatever. I mean, maybe on the outside it looked like I did, but I don't know. I wondered sometimes like how am I missing this? How am I how am I not functioning as well there? And now I know. Now I know, and it's wonderful to know. I hope it's wonderful for you to understand that too and not feel like it's any fault of yours. We're doing the best we can. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. It makes me happy to know that you're listening. And honestly, I haven't promoted any any episode yet. I've created an Instagram account for this. I've created a Facebook group to gather and talk and all kinds of things. But I haven't posted anything to him yet or told anyone about any of it except for my daughter-in-law, who also has ADHD. So, anyway, thank you for being here without even me trying to get the word out to the world. Someday I will, and until then, it's fine that it's just us. So, thanks so much for being here. Bye.
Open windows, broken shadows. Frozen dreams are left for tomorrow. Without a cause. No time for a pause. Rewind, I've run out of time to sing melodies and harmonies. I'm cut short, the silence of sound has yet been found, but not by me.